Commander Jake Morrison's fingers dug into the cold metal railing of the Defiant. As red alert klaxons screamed through every corridor like wounded animals, the bridge shook with the resonance of hyperspace engines powering down, and Jake felt that familiar knot in his stomach, the one that always came before everything went to hell. His weathered face, marked by a jagged scar that ran from his left temple to his jaw, told the story of the Battle of Proxima. That was where he'd learned the Empire didn't just conquer worlds, they erased them. The scar was a reminder, a promise, a debt waiting to be paid. Admiral Lieutenant Emma Rodriguez called from the communications station, her voice cutting through the chaos with barely controlled excitement. "Sir, we're intercepting Imperial broadcasts from the Vega system. They're asking whose Armada this is." Jake's eyes, once warm brown, now cold as winter, stone-fixed on the tactical display. 63 ships arranged in perfect formation, their sleek hulls gleaming like polished obsidian against the starfield. Each vessel was a masterpiece of human engineering, built not for exploration or trade, but for one purpose: war. The display showed their fleet designation: Terran Defense Fleet, Task Force Retribution. But everyone on the bridge knew what they really were. They were humanity's answer to genocide. They were the sword forged in the fires of New Austin. 3 years, Jake whispered, his voice barely audible above the bridge noise. 3 years. Since the Empire had turned his entire world into a ball of radioactive glass? 3 years since they'd vaporized his wife Lisa while she tended her garden. 3 years since his daughter Katie had been reduced to atoms while playing in the backyard. You know what's funny about space? Everyone talks about the silence, but Jake had learned there was something worse than silence. It was the absence of screams. When New Austin died, 12 million people should have screamed. But sound doesn't travel in vacuum. The Empire had perfected the art of silent murder. His knuckles went white as he gripped the railing harder. The rage that had sustained him for 3 years, the cold, calculating fury that had driven him to accept this impossible mission burned in his chest like a nuclear reactor, but he'd learned to channel it, to focus it, to turn it into something useful, sir? Rodriguez continued, her fingers dancing across her console. The Imperial broadcasts are getting more frantic. They're mobilizing their fleet. Looks like they're taking us seriously. Jake almost smiled at that. Almost, the Empire should take them seriously. It spent 3 years preparing for this moment. 3 years developing weapons that would make the Empire's plasma cannons look like firecrackers. 3 years learning to fight dirty in a galaxy that had forgotten what real war looked like. Admiral, his tactical officer, Commander Mike Stevens, spoke up from his station. Long-range sensors are picking up Imperial fleet movements. They're bringing everything they have. 400-plus ships, including at least 6 dreadnoughts. 400 ships. Jake had seen Imperial dreadnoughts before, massive kilometers-long monsters that could crack planets like eggs. Each one carried enough firepower to sterilize a solar system. The Empire had built them to intimidate, to make resistance seem hopeless. But here's the thing about hope: sometimes it's not about the odds. Sometimes it's about the alternative. And for Jake Morrison, the alternative was letting his family's killers sleep peacefully in their beds. "Open all channels," he commanded, his voice cutting through the bridge noise like a plasma blade. "All Imperial frequencies. Let's make sure every single one of those bastards can hear this." The bridge fell silent, except for the subtle hum of weapons charging. 63 ships worth of human engineering, each one packed with technology that would have seemed like magic to their ancestors. But magic was just science that people hadn't figured out yet. And humanity had figured out some very interesting things in the 3 years since. New Austin. Jake straightened his uniform, the same black dress uniform he'd worn to Lisa's memorial service, the same one he'd sworn to die in if necessary. Reflection in the tactical display showed a man who had already died once. What stood here now was something harder, something focused, something that the Empire had created by taking everything that mattered to him. "This is Admiral Jake Morrison of the Terran Defense Fleet." His voice carried across the void, thick with barely contained fury that had been building for 3 years. "We're here because your Empire crossed a line. You killed our families. You burned our worlds. You paused, letting the weight of his words settle across the cosmos. Somewhere out there, Imperial officers were scrambling to understand what they faced. They were running calculations, checking databases, trying to figure out how 63 ships could possibly threaten their massive fleet. They were about to find out. And now, Jake continued, his voice dropping to a whisper that somehow carried, "More menace than any shout, now you answer to us." The transmission ended with a sharp click that echoed through the bridge like a gunshot. In the distance, Jake could see the massive Imperial fleet beginning to move, their ships blotting out the stars like a plague of metal locusts. 400 ships versus 63. The Empire probably thought those were good odds, but Jake, Morrison had been waiting for this moment. They all had. Every human on every ship in the fleet had their own new Austin, their own Lisa, their own Katie. The Empire had turned them all into weapons. And now those weapons were aimed directly at the heart of Imperial space. The real question wasn't whether humanity could win. The real question was whether the Empire would survive long enough to surrender, just like compound interest grows exponentially over time. Turning small investments into massive returns, humanity's pain had been compounding for 3 years. And now it was time to collect. Want to see how small actions can create massive results? Check out my next video about the incredible power of compounding. It'll change how you think about everything. Admiral Kevin Walsh stood like a monument to Imperial superiority on the bridge of the Dominion's wrath, his augmented body gleaming. Under the harsh bridge lights, every inch of him had been enhanced cybernetic implants that made him faster, stronger, and theoretically smarter than any baseline human. His left eye was a crimson scanner that could analyze enemy formations in microseconds. His right arm was a mechanical marvel that could calculate firing solutions while simultaneously commanding fleet movements. He was the Empire's perfect weapon. At least that's what he told himself every morning when he looked in the mirror and saw more machine than man staring back. "Sir," Commander Sarah Blackwood called from her tactical station, her voice carrying that particular tension that came from staring at something that didn't make sense. "These human ships are ... unusual. I'm not reading standard weapon signatures. No plasma cannons, no missile tubes, no particle beam arrays. It's like they're not even armed." Walsh's laugh was a sound that would have chilled normal humans too. The bond cold, mechanical, and utterly without warmth. His vocal cords had been replaced with synthetic modulators that gave his voice the exact frequency needed to project authority. The Empire had spent decades perfecting the art of intimidation, and Kevin Walsh was their masterpiece. "Perfect," he said, his augmented features twisting into what might have been a smile if you squinted and had never seen a real one. "High Command wants a demonstration. I want the galaxy to remember why challenging the Empire is a death sentence. You know what's ironic about perfection? It makes you blind to possibilities you never considered." Walsh had spent so long being the Empire's perfect weapon that he'd forgotten what it felt like to face an unknown variable. And right now, 63 human ships were the biggest unknown variable he'd ever encountered. Broadcast this engagement. Across all Imperial networks, Walsh commanded, his mechanical voice carrying across the bridge like a death sentence. "Let every conquered world see what happens when primitives challenge the Empire. Let them watch as we turn these humans into space dust." The Imperial fleet was a sight to behold. 437 vessels arranged in perfect battle formation. Each ship was a monument to technological superiority, built not just to win battles but to crush hope itself. The dreadnoughts alone were massive kilometers-long behemoths that could crack planets like eggs. The cruisers had reduced entire civilizations to ash. The destroyers had hunted the remnants of a dozen species to extinction. Walsh had commanded fleets like this. For 20 years, he'd glassed 12 worlds, enslaved 43 species, and earned the nickname the Butcher of Andromeda for his particularly creative approach to genocide. His augmented mind held the memories of every battle, every victory, every moment, of terror in his enemies' eyes before he snuffed out their lives. But something was different about these humans. Something that made his enhanced instincts whisper warnings he couldn't quite understand. Marcus Chen spoke up, his voice cutting through Walsh's mechanical thoughts. The humans are transmitting again. Jake Morrison's voice filled the bridge once more, calm and steady despite facing overwhelming odds. Admiral Walsh, you have one final chance. Withdraw your forces from human space, release all prisoners, and surrender for War Crimes Tribunal. This is your last warning. The audacity was breathtaking. 63 ships demanding the surrender of 400. Walsh's augmented mind ran probability calculations. The humans had a 0.0001% chance of survival. Mathematical certainty. Cold, hard numbers that didn't lie. So why did they sound so confident? Reply on all frequencies, he commanded, his mechanical voice dripping with contempt. Tell them the Empire doesn't negotiate with dead men. Tell them they have exactly 60 seconds to surrender before we demonstrate why the galaxy kneels before. Imperial might. But deep in his enhanced mind, in the small corner that still remembered being human, a voice whispered that something was wrong. These humans showed no fear, no hesitation, no desperate last-minute attempts to negotiate. They faced certain death with the calm of those who knew something he didn't. It was the same calm he'd seen once before, during the siege of Kepler Station. A young ensign had stood at his post even as the station's shields failed. Even as Imperial plasma beams carved through the hull like butter. The boy had actually smiled as he pressed the detonator. That took half of Walsh's original fleet with him. The Empire had learned to fear that kind of calm. It was the calm of people who had already accepted death and found something worth dying for. It was the calm of those who had nothing left to lose. Sir, Blackwood reported, her professional composure starting to crack. Their formation hasn't changed. They're not moving to attack positions. They're not raising shields. They're just ... waiting. Walsh's cybernetic eyes zoomed in on the human fleet, analyzing every detail. The ships were sleek, angular, built with an aesthetic that prioritized function over intimidation. They looked almost peaceful floating there in the void, like sleeping. Predators waiting for the right moment to strike. Tactical analysis, Walsh commanded, his mechanical voice betraying none of his growing unease. Sir, based on their hull composition and energy signatures, shouldn't be able to withstand even a single salvo from our destroyers. Their shields appear minimal, their armor is some kind of unknown alloy, and their weapons? What weapons? Walsh interrupted. That's just it, sir. Can't identify any weapons systems. It's like they came to a gunfight with nothing but their bare hands. Walsh's laugh was sharp and metallic. Then they're even more foolish than I thought. All ships. Prepare for full assault. Show the galaxy what happens when insects challenge gods. But as his fleet moved into attack formation, as 400 ships prepared to unleash hell upon 63, Admiral Kevin Walsh couldn't shake the feeling that he was missing something crucial. Something that would make the difference between victory and disaster. The humans were too calm, too confident, too ready to die. And in his experience, people who were ready to die were the most dangerous enemies of all. Just like compound interest. Seems harmless at first, but grows into an unstoppable force. Walsh was about to discover that underestimating your enemy's hidden strength could lead to exponential consequences. Want to see how small underestimations can create massive disasters? Check out my next video about the incredible power of compounding. It'll show you how tiny advantages grow into game-changing advantages. The Imperial fleet opened fire first, and it was like watching the birth of a new star. 437 ships unleashed hell simultaneously. Coordinated barrage that painted space in brilliant plasma and quantum fire. The void itself seemed to scream as enough destructive energy to sterilize an entire planet streaked toward the human formation. Walsh watched with the satisfaction of a man who had orchestrated this symphony of destruction dozens of times before. His cybernetic eye automatically calculated the energy output: 14.7 petawatts per second. Enough firepower to vaporize a small moon? His mechanical heart should have been racing with excitement, but the augmented organ simply pumped synthetic blood through his veins at optimal efficiency. Beautiful, he whispered, his voice carrying the cold appreciation of a master craftsman admiring his work. Record this for the archives. I want future generations to see what happens. When primitives challenged the natural order, the human ships didn't move. They didn't raise shields. They didn't even attempt evasive maneuvers. They simply waited, floating in space like 63 metal coffins ready to receive their occupants. Impact in 3, ... 2, ... Commander. Blackwood counted down from her tactical station, her voice steady and professional. Then she stopped. Her voice cracked with disbelief. Sir, the weapons they're not hitting. They're being absorbed. Walsh's augmented features froze mid-sneer. Repeat that, Commander. The plasma beams, the quantum torpedoes, the particle streams, they're all making contact with the human ships, but they're not exploding. They're just ... disappearing. Walsh's cybernetic eyes zoomed in on the human vessels, analyzing the impossible scene unfolding before him. The devastating barraging of firepower to crack continental plates was disappearing into their holes. Like water into sand, no explosions, no hull breaches, no signs of damage whatsoever. It was like watching someone swallow lightning and ask for seconds. It's possible, he breathed, his mechanical voice glitching with shock for the first time in 20 years. His augmented mind ran through every possibility, every scenario he'd encountered in decades of warfare. Nothing. No technology in the known galaxy could simply absorb that kind of punishment. You know what's terrifying about the impossible? Not that it can't happen. When it does happen, it means everything you thought you knew about the universe is wrong. And Admiral Kevin Walsh was about to discover just how wrong he'd been. Then the humans responded. It started as a low frequency that somehow transmitted through the vacuum of space, a resonance that made the Imperial ship's hulls sing like struck bells. The sound was impossible, physics-defying, yet every person on every Imperial vessel could hear it in their bones. Sir, Lieutenant Chen called out, his voice tight with growing panic. We're detecting massive energy buildups from all human vessels. The readings they're off the charts. The human vessels began to glow with an inner light that hurt to look at directly. It wasn't the harsh glare of plasma weapons or the cold gleam of energy shields. This was something else, something that seemed to bend space around it, making the stars behind the ships appear to ripple like water. Walsh's mechanical eye tried to analyze the phenomenon and failed. His augmented brain, enhanced with quantum processors that could calculate hyperspace trajectories in milliseconds, couldn't even begin to categorize what he was seeing. Sir. Marcus Chen screamed over alarms that had begun wailing across the bridge like the death cries of wounded animals. Something's happening to our ships. The hulls they're changing. Walsh watched in horror as his mighty fleet began to transform. Not destroyed, that would have been merciful. Not damaged, that would have been comprehensible. Altered. Changed at the molecular level into something that violated every law of physics he'd ever learned. The dreadnought Eternal Dominion, a ship that had cracked the homeworld of the Centauri Alliance, began to twist like molten metal. Its kilometer-long hull folded in on itself, creating impossible geometric shapes that hurt to perceive. The crew was still alive. Walsh could see their life signs on his tactical display. But they were trapped inside a ship that had become a living puzzle box. The cruiser Iron Fist folded itself into a crystalline sculpture that would have been beautiful if it weren't so terrifying. Its plasma cannons became decorative spirals. Its missile bays transformed into artistic flourishes that defied three-dimensional space. The destroyer Void Hunter became an abstract art installation floating in space, its hull twisted into loops and curves that seemed to exist in more dimensions than human minds could process. The crew was unharmed, but completely helpless. Their ship now a monument to humanity's impossible power. One by one, every ship in the Imperial fleet underwent the same transformation. 437 vessels, the pride of the Empire. The terror of the galaxy became an avant-garde art exhibition floating in the void. But here's the kicker that made Walsh's synthetic blood run cold. The Dominion's wrath remained untouched. Not because the humans couldn't affect it, but because they chose not to. They deliberately left him and his crew unharmed, able to witness the impossible demonstration of power. It was calculated mercy. and that made it even more terrifying than any weapon. "Sir," Blackwood whispered. Her professional composure finally shattered. "What do we do? Our entire fleet is I don't even have words for what our fleet is." Walsh stood in stunned silence, his augmented mind struggling to process what he'd witnessed. In less than 4 minutes, humanity had neutralized the Empire's greatest battle fleet without firing a single recognizable weapon. They had rewritten the laws of physics as casually as someone might rearrange furniture. His cybernetic eye kept trying to analyze the transformed ships, kept failing to understand how matter could be reorganized so completely while keeping every crew member alive. It was precision beyond anything he'd ever imagined. Control that made his own technological enhancements seem like stone knives and bear skins. The humans hadn't just defeated the Imperial fleet, they had made it irrelevant. They had demonstrated power that reduced the Empire's greatest achievements to the level of children's toys, and they had done it with the calm efficiency of people who were just getting started. Just like compound interest starts small, but grows into an unstoppable force that reshapes everything it touches. Walsh was witnessing the moment when humanity's true power began to compound exponentially across the galaxy. Want to see how small advantages can grow into game-changing power? Check out my next video about the incredible force of compounding. It'll show you how tiny edges become massive. Advantages over time. The silence that followed was deafening, not the peaceful quiet of space, but the suffocating stillness that comes after witnessing the impossible. Admiral Kevin Walsh stood frozen on his bridge, his augmented mind struggling to process what his cybernetic eyes had just recorded. 400 ships transformed into abstract art in less than 4 minutes. It was like watching reality itself get rewritten by someone who had never bothered to read the manual. Then Admiral Jake Morrison's voice filled the void, carrying the weight of judgment itself. Imperial fleet has been neutralized through matter reorganization. All personnel remain alive and unharmed. This technology will be reversed upon full compliance with our demands. Walsh's mechanical heart should have been racing, but the synthetic organ just pumped coolant through his systems at optimal efficiency. His augmented mind, enhanced with quantum processors that could calculate the trajectory of every atom in a solar system, kept trying to analyze what had just happened in hitting computational walls. Matter reorganization. The humans said it, so casually like they were discussing weekend plans. But Walsh knew what it meant. They had reached into the fundamental structure of reality and rearranged it like a child playing with building blocks. They had made the impossible look routine. "I repeat," Morrison continued, his voice carrying 3 years of grief and rage that had been compressed into diamond-hard determination: immediate withdrawal from all human territories, release of all prisoners, and surrender of war criminals. You have 72 hours to comply. The transmission ended with a click that echoed through the bridge like a gunshot. In the distance, the twisted remains of the Imperial fleet drifted like monuments to hubris. Ships that had once been the terror of the galaxy now floated as artistic sculptures that hurt to look at directly. Walsh stood alone on his bridge, surrounded by officers whose faces reflected his own terror. Commander Blackwood's professional composure had cracked completely, revealing the frightened woman beneath the military facade. Lieutenant Chen kept staring at his console, as if it might suddenly start making sense again. You know what's funny? About being the apex predator? You never really consider what happens when something higher up the food chain decides to introduce itself. The Empire had spent 8 centuries at the top, and they'd forgotten that the top was just another step on an infinite ladder. "Sir?" Blackwood whispered, her voice barely audible above the bridge's emergency lighting. "High Command is requesting an immediate tactical report. They want to know. They want to know how we lost." Walsh's mechanical laugh was hollow, a sound that would have been bitter if his vocal cords hadn't been replaced with synthetic modulators. "Tell them we didn't lose, Commander. We never had a chance. Picked a fight with gods and thought we were hunting sheep." His augmented mind raced through tactical possibilities, running scenario after scenario through quantum processors that had never failed him before. Every calculation came back with the same result: 0 probability of success. The humans hadn't just defeated the Imperial fleet, they had made the concept of defeat irrelevant. "But Sir," Chen spoke up, his voice cracking with confusion, "they're just humans." Primitive mammals who barely discovered fire yesterday. How can they have technology that makes our dreadnoughts look like children's toys? Walsh is cybernetic. I focused on the twisted remains of the Eternal Dominion. The ship was still there, still functional, still keeping its crew alive, but it had been transformed into something that existed in more dimensions than human minds could process. It was precision beyond anything he'd ever imagined, a kind of control that made his own technological enhancements seem like stone. Knives and bearskins? Maybe that's the problem, Walsh said slowly, his mechanical voice betraying none of the cosmic dread settling in his chest. Maybe we've been thinking about this all wrong. We assumed that being human made them weak. But what if being human is exactly what made them strong? The bridge fell silent except for the hum of life support systems and the distant wail of alarms from the transformed ships. Walsh's augmented mind began to piece together fragments of intelligence that had been dismissed as irrelevant. Human colonies that had fought to the last man. Human ships that had rammed Imperial dreadnoughts rather than surrender. Human civilians who had chosen death over slavery. The Empire had mistaken desperation for weakness. They had assumed that a species willing to die for their beliefs was somehow inferior. But now Walsh understood the truth. Humanity's greatest strength wasn't their technology or their tactics. It was their absolute refusal to accept defeat. Sir Blackwood's voice interrupted his thoughts. What do we tell High Command? How do we explain that our entire battle doctrine is obsolete? Walsh closed his eyes, feeling the weight of cosmic insignificance settle on his shoulders like a lead blanket. For 800 years, the Empire had been the apex predator of the galaxy. They had conquered civilizations, enslaved worlds, and considered themselves the natural rulers of all they surveyed. They had built their entire identity around being the strongest, the most advanced, the most feared. Now he had to explain to his superiors that they had encountered something beyond their comprehension, something that had been watching them, studying them, and had finally decided to act. The humans hadn't just appeared out of nowhere. They had been preparing for this moment for years. Tell them, Walsh said quietly, his mechanical voice barely above a whisper, that we've discovered what happens when you back a species into a corner and leave them nothing to lose. Tell them that we've learned what real desperation looks like when it's had time to evolve. His communications officer looked up from his console, voice barely audible. Sir, what do we do now? Walsh stared out at the impossible vista of transformed ships, each one a testament to humanity's terrifying capabilities. The answer was simple, even if it shattered everything he'd believed about the natural order of the universe. We surrender, he said. We surrender before they decide to stop being merciful. The age of imperial dominance was over. The age of humanity had begun. And like compound interest that starts small but grows into an unstoppable force, Walsh realized that this was just the beginning of humanity's expansion across the galaxy. Want to see how small beginnings can grow into game-changing forces? Check out my next video about the incredible power of compounding. It'll show you how tiny advantages compound into massive transformations over time. 71 hours later, Admiral Jake Morrison stood in the command center of Earth's newest orbital defense platform, watching history unfold through reinforced transpersonal windows. The massive Imperial fleet, what remained of it, limped away from human space like wounded animals fleeing a predator they'd finally learned to fear. The surrender had been complete. Unconditional. Absolute. Jake's reflection in the window showed a man who had aged decades in 3 years. The scar from Proxima had faded, but new lines etched his face lines, carved by responsibility, by the weight of decisions that had reshaped the galaxy. His uniform was still the same black dress uniform he'd worn to Lisa's memorial service, but now it carried the weight of victory instead of grief. Lieutenant Emma Rodriguez approached with a datapad, her face a mixture of exhaustion and vindication. She'd been with him since the beginning. Since those dark days when humanity's future looked like nothing but radioactive dust and empty space, now she carried the reports that would reshape everything. Sir, she said, her voice carrying the quiet satisfaction of someone who had witnessed the impossible. Final reports from all sectors. The Empire has withdrawn from every human world, released all prisoners, and agreed to the tribunal. It's over. Jake nodded, but his eyes remained fixed on the stars. 3 years ago, he had been a simple colony defense captain, worried about pirates and smugglers. The Empire had changed that. They had forged him into something harder, colder, more focused than he had ever imagined possible. They had taken everything that made him human and turned it into a weapon, and now that weapon had cut the heart out. Of the galaxy's greatest empire, prisoner releases are confirmed, Rodriguez continued, scrolling through her datapad. 17,000 humans freed from Imperial labor camps. The war crimes tribunals begin next month. And sir, she paused, her voice catching slightly, we found the new Austin survivors. 43 people who made it to the underground shelters before the bombardment. They're alive, Jake. Some of our people survived. Jake's hand gripped the railing so hard his knuckles went white. 43 survivors out of 12 million. It wasn't enough. It would never be enough. But it was something. It was hope pulled from the ashes of despair. You know what's interesting about revenge? People always say it's a dish best served cold, but Jake had learned something different. Revenge served with calculated precision, with overwhelming force. With the kind of patience that turns grief into purpose, that's a dish that reshapes the universe. Admiral Rodriguez continued, her voice taking on a new urgency. There's something else. Long-range sensors are detecting movement from the Centauri systems. Other species are mobilizing. You've seen what we did to the Empire. Jake's smile was sharp as a plasma blade. Let them come. Let them all come. Humanity spent centuries learning to fight each other. We got very good at it, and we've learned to fight the galaxy. Behind him, the tactical display showed the new reality painted in holographic light. 63 human ships had broken an empire that had conquered half the galaxy. But those ships were just the tip of the iceberg. Hidden in asteroid belts, disguised as mining platforms, buried in the hearts of dead worlds, humanity's true fleet waited. The display showed the numbers that would make alien strategists wake up in cold sweats. 1,200 ships of the line, each one equipped with the same matter reorganization technology that had turned the Imperial fleet into abstract art. Thousands of automated defense platforms scattered across human space, weapons that could rewrite the laws of physics while keeping their targets alive to appreciate the da-da-da-da experience. But the real weapon wasn't the technology, it was the message, Rodriguez Jake said quietly. Send a transmission to every species in the galaxy. All frequencies, all languages, maximum broadcast power. Sir. Tell them that humanity is now accepting applications for diplomatic relations. Tell them that we're reasonable people who prefer trade to war, cooperation to conquest. But also, tell them his voice took on the edge that had made Imperial officers surrender without firing a shot. Tell them that we've demonstrated what happens to those who mistake our preference for peace as weakness. The transmission went out, within minutes, carrying humanity's new position to every corner of the galaxy. Earth's children had come home from the stars, and they were no longer the naive explorers who had first ventured into the void. With dreams of peaceful contact and mutual understanding, they were apex predators, and the galaxy was their hunting ground, sir, Rodriguez said, reading from her pad. We're already getting responses. Centauri Federation is requesting immediate diplomatic talks. The Vegan Republic is offering trade agreements. The Andromeda Collective is, well, they're asking very politely if we have any territorial disputes with them. Jake's laugh was the first genuine sound of joy he'd made in 3 years. Tell them we're always happy to discuss things reasonably. Schedule the meetings. Make sure they understand that diplomatic immunity doesn't extend to war crimes. The Empire learned that lesson the hard way. The Empire had asked whose Armada they faced. Now the galaxy knew. Earth's children had returned, transformed by loss, into something the universe had never seen before. They had taken humanity's greatest weakness, their emotional attachment to each other, turned it into their most devastating strength. The age of human expansion had begun. It would be built on a foundation of compound strength. Every victory would make the next one easier. Every demonstration of power would make the next negotiation smoother. Every species that chose cooperation over conflict would make humanity stronger, just like compound interest. Human influence would grow exponentially, reshaping the galaxy, one relationship at a time. Want to see how small actions compound into massive transformations? Check out my next video about the incredible power of compounding. It'll show you how tiny advantages grow into civilizations and changing forces over time.